If we change the salient ideology, which has only, it's relatively recent that we've decided that we need to live this way, as you know, the engine of wealth being getting as many human beings as possible to consume as much stuff as possible. If you actually started to unpick that and tell a different story, then you'd have a generation of humans who would find that perfectly ridiculous.
This is Straight Talk in the COVID economy, and my name is Larry Quick. Our world has changed and there's no going back. The COVID economy is now very real. We are adapting to telework, Zooming, online learning and new industries like PanSafe and other opportunities revealed by COVID-19. The challenges are also with us: bankruptcies, unemployment, debt and confusion. In Straight Talk in the COVID economy, we meet thinkers and innovators who bring insight and information into the opportunities and risks of our rapidly emerging COVID economy. Straight Talk in the COVID economy is brought to you by Resilient Futures. This is alongside our partner, Impact Africa Network. Impact Africa Network is an innovation incubator based in Nairobi, Kenya. It seeks to be a catalyst for the next Silicon Valley in Africa. Impact Africa Network needs all the support we can provide. So please donate at www.impactafrica.network. Hi, I'd like to welcome Cindy Forde today to our interview. She's coming in from Cambridge, United Kingdom. Welcome, Cindy.
Hi, Larry.
And
hi,
how
everyone.
are you going there? Just a quick COVID update.
Well, you know, in Cambridge, we're lucky we haven't been hit too badly, but obviously our hearts are with the nation and with the world. As we see this virus unfold, we hope it brings minimum suffering and maximum opportunity to learn, really.
That's correct. I think the whole world is learning, and we were just talking prior to the interview that there's whilst we may have some disorientation taking place now, there's a really clear emerging environment around how we deal with this, and what can we learn and take forward into other parts of our operating style into the future. And I thought just also your niece, it's Lila, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
She made the comment to you, which you referred to me as the pandemic is revealing. Very revealing.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing on so many fronts, on the personal all the way through to the systemic. So I think if we can, you know, with this ability now to look behind the facade, I think there is a lot of learning that we can do, and certainly in terms of how we decide to rebuild our systems, whether we continue with the old models that are effectively imploding, or whether we decide to, you know, build new boats.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. The model was broken way back, whatever the social economic model we have for today. It's not happened necessarily because of COVID-19. It was already broken through a whole range of things which we'll discuss. But if I could just start off and give a bit of a wrap for Cindy. Cindy's career has been dedicated to transforming how we understand and act as human beings towards the earth. And I think that's amazing. Where we actually join right in is the living systems that sustain us. And that is obviously a planetary system, and then how we treat it from the social econometry system. You have an MSc in Responsibility and Business Practice. You led the Cambridge Science Centre as CEO and the Blue Marine Foundation as Managing Director. A fantastic background. And you also founded Planetary. And I just loved, you've got to go to this website, planetary.world. And it's for children to understand how our planet as a living system works, and how do you have the capacity for creativity and innovation to be able to live successfully in this planet. And that punchline of care, share and dare is so relevant for today. So tell us a bit about Planetary.
Well, I think that, you know, we're talking obviously about the system and how we can build a better one. And I think really from children land on this planet, eco-literate, but we actually then funnel them into an ideology that is essentially extract to extinction. And it is just an ideology, it's a construct, it's what, it's what it's a form of indoctrination, actually, in a way, from everything that we have, our media, social media, our education curriculums. They're all designed to support the economic system that people see as the engine of this world. So I think if you want to have a different system, then you need to enable people to think differently. And I think the earlier that you start that process, the better, really. I mean, there's a lot, in my earlier career, I did a lot of work with corporates and with governments around sustainability. But always there's the voice in the back of my mind saying we wouldn't actually have to do this if we had a generation of people who were equipped to understand Earth as a living system and to be the innovators and entrepreneurs of a better world. So why not start, as you mean to go on, and get children from as young as possible, really, to start thinking critically and systemically. And instead of seeing this as as a terrifying time to be alive, I mean, children are really being overwhelmed now with the information that's getting to them. With climate change, we're seeing the youth climate strikes across the world. This is actually a massive opportunity for transformation. This is one of the most exciting times to be a human being. And the way that we're telling that story to children is that they're the ones who get the chance to learn how to fly a small planet. And I don't think that you could have anything more exciting than that to look forward to as a little person. So that's the mission behind Planetary, to teach children to pilot this Earth.
Pilot this Earth. That's a Buckminster Fuller sort of reference there in terms of our role to planet, as for the planet, is to actually see ourselves as guiding the planet as it goes through its evolutions and those sorts of things. Tell me, the care, share, dare. I found that really interesting around Planetary. You know, care as in care about the world and yourself, etc., inside that world. Share that information. The dare, I think that's a really interesting part of it.
Yeah, well, thanks, Larry. Just to recap, I mean, thanks very much for inviting people to go and visit the website. So Planetary is an interdisciplinary and multimedia education system. So we're using all the channels that children love: print material, digital material, interactive, actual hands-on experiences to teach children, very much in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. If 193 countries have signed up to say this is where we want to be in 2030, then how are we going to get there with an education system that's based on the Industrial Revolution? So we're basing our materials around these goals, and as I say, in a transdisciplinary way, because you can't separate things out. Part of our problem is that people live in silos, and discoveries and innovation happen when you work across disciplines. So that's essentially what Planetary is. The care, share and dare is that underpins everything, the way that we try to guide the children through. So obviously learning, if you understand how Earth works, that's caring for the system that sustains ourselves. So it's self-care through to planetary care. The sharing, that's learning how to collaborate and innovate. As I said, some of this is online, so the children see each other as a global community, and that they each hold a piece of the solution. So by collaboration and sharing, they can actually innovate new solutions together. The daring, I think it's so important that children feel engaged and part of the world that they can co-create. And that is allowing them to see themselves as activists, as innovators. And so every piece of material that create has an action for these children to take. And it's, there's nothing, lose that inhibition. You have a voice, you can use it, whether it's writing a letter to your Minister of Environment, whether it's designing a possible way of protecting a reef. We've tried to let children, there's no right or wrong answers. The most important thing is to feel enabled to take action and be part of the world that you want to build. So, and knowing that you can do that.
So hearing you talk, we could make, whether it's a mistake or not, maybe it is a mistake, is that my view and Resilient Futures view is we've had too much of pale, male and stale. And if there's anything we have to learn is to broaden our focus to hear your voice and your type of voice come through, which may sound a little bit challenging because it's for those type of people who reject the Thornburg view of the young people standing up and saying no more, and also kids being educated in this way because it will only scare them if they do, and all of that sort of carry on. You're a trained educator for a start, but tell us a bit about your history, because I hear when I talk to you, teenage activist, apartheid, being involved in the corporate world. You have a master's in business, sustainable finance. You've worked in sustainable investment. You talked about that in terms of dancing with the bear. You've worked in Brunei on sustainable tourism. So you don't come at this from an academic, or could I say, not there's anything wrong with a greeny type perspective that is purely about having young people just concerned or worried about climate change. Really, it's a lot deeper than that, and them understanding what's required from a social economic perspective as well. But tell us a bit about your background, teenage activist to what you're doing today.
Sure. So, thanks again, Larry. I think that that resonates with me, the teenage activism that you're seeing now, and I think it's great. Because that's kind of where that was a defining point in my life. Just before I go there, I just do want to say I think you're absolutely right. I think it's if the teenagers are angry and upset, I think what you're seeing is that they're hitting against the walls of a system that isn't designed to deal with the issues that they're asking to be dealt with. And instead of that turning into frustration and fear, we're trying to convert that into a sense of power, that we can actually do something, because all the solutions, or most of the solutions that we need, for example, I don't think you can separate things out, but things like climate change, we have got everything that we need to address that on the table. What we haven't got is the political will and the framework to do that. But people are still at the stage where they think it can't be done. Yes. So I think it's really important for children to understand crystal clearly how, or as much as a human can, how the biophysics of our planet, and to see how these things can be very clearly addressed, which is already there. That's not some future thinking, that's just fact. And so I think once children know that, or young people know that, then they know what to ask for, and they know that they can actually be part of that change. So in terms of being back to your question about my background, I started out as a young person asking for change, and I obviously had a family. My parents very much coming out of the civil rights movement. We're people who stand up and ask for the world that we want to see. So my involvement began as a teenager in asking for an end to the horrific regime that was apartheid. And at the time that we were protesting, that we were being arrested, as you see the young children being arrested now, we didn't know whether Nelson Mandela would get out. The Thatcher government that was in power in Britain referred to him as a black terrorist, and the perceived worldview that this man was a danger to society and needed to be on Robben Island. And people would walk past us in Trafalgar Square and with a disapproving looks. You don't meet a single person today who remembers that. Everybody was on the right side of history. Nelson Mandela is now one of the greatest freedom fighters the world has ever seen, and greatest advocates of human dignity around the world. But we didn't know that was going to happen, but we just believed that this change would come. It's just impossible to think that human beings cannot see beyond these very small limiting barriers of conservatism, which I think you can see climate. So from then I've been working on change in different ways, and certainly in the environment movement. The facts about climate change have been known for at least that long, to be honest. And yet it's taken this long to get them into the mainstream psyche. You just don't know how long it's going to take. Something like COVID-19 coming on, where people aren't making those links as systemic, that is linked to destruction of the biosphere. But I think that will help for people to see, to shift the people's perception and complacency, really, that we're dealing with these issues. But you just have to have the self-belief and the belief in a different. I think sometimes people, as you've talked about horizons, there are people who can see, or who are enabled to see beyond the mainstream horizons, and you can see that. So it doesn't make sense to believe, to carry on acting in the way that the status quo is telling you to act. And I think teenagers today are really tapping into that, and what they need is the reassurance and the support to see that there are new maps to be drawn, and there's people all around the world that are willing to draw them. So as a so that was my beginning in change making, and then I've worked at different points of the system to try to to make change. The world moves on. The things that sounded, Nelson Mandela was released. The environment did start to become more important on the corporate agenda, with things like the sinking of the Brent Spar in the North Sea, the furore around that, the rise of the internet, the things that are visible that companies are doing in different corners of the world suddenly become much more in the public eye. There's all sorts of reasons for that. So, I've tried to find effective ways of engaging with the system to bring change. Business is very important. It's not anti-business, making good money. It's working out how to do that in a way that doesn't just destroy your own life support system.
Yeah,
Hence
people make they think it's an either or, but it's not.
It's not at all. So it's just really trying to work in different parts of the finance system is a hugely important because that's where the dancing with the bear reference comes to. That drives the engine of how businesses are designed. So you're designing business as an organization to serve as a model that's just working on short-term profit. So if you're trying to build in longer-term sustainability, you're working really up against the face of that paradox. But the thing that I work, and again, working with governments, trying to transition from oil-based economies into things, so you're looking at what value have you got beyond oil. We've got this incredible biodiversity, so use that as your engine of generating wealth. But all the way through my progression has been this thought that if we change the salient ideology, which has it's relatively recent that we've decided that we need to live this way, as the engine of wealth being getting as many human beings as possible to consume as much stuff as possible, and then indoctrinating all of us in different ways to believe that is the only way that we can live. If you actually started to unpick that and tell a different story, then you'd have a generation of humans who would find that perfectly ridiculous, especially given that the systemic destruction that it's causing. So it always comes back to how we enable and empower the rising generation, for me.
I'm just going to maybe stop there for a second. In our work from home, work from office life, we've just had a refrigerated truck turn up outside my office window. So I'm just going to turn it off, the recording off, and we can still chat. But
Okay.
Won't be a second. Okay, we're in the post-refrigerated truck outside the front window of our first floor level. And we're back with Cindy. And I hope you heard the piece that Cindy talked about when the truck was outside. But I'd take us to another spot that Cindy's spoken about, and it's about the biophysics of the planet. And when I'm sort of looking at that, I think to myself, biophysics of the planet, that's the whole ecosystem. That does entail, obviously, the biodiversity, but the different forms of energy. We have lightning, we have water, which is energy, we have food, which is energy, which we have all those sorts of things. And we became masters of those if we go back through history, fire, drinking water, growing, early agriculture, all those sorts of things. And we did that in such a small scale, and there's not many people around. So we actually got a good start. But then the biophysics allowed us to look at fossil fuels, and we've become very successful in an extraction mentality. And not all of it's necessarily that bad, but particularly the types of energy that are used for consumption that have high outputs of pollution and high outputs of CO2. So, you know, we're in a situation where we've become really good at you know, the biophysics of the planet, and socializing them, putting as the backbone of economy. There's a lot of interdependencies with fossil fuel. They drive cars, they do all sorts of things that are there. And the only problem is that they are not good for our planet. And, you know, we might be able to change cars, but we can't change planets. So that's a big issue. And I'm wearing my 350.org shirt today. And I'm not necessarily a greenie. I'm a strategist. I just believe that green movement has done a great job in getting some focus around the destructive nature of our social economics at the moment. And I don't want that, you know, because I enjoy working, making a living. We have a statement here called "Make a difference, make a dollar, and don't die doing it." So if you're going to be dying doing it, the rest is a waste of time. Yeah. I also have 11 grandkids and 10 kids with the partners. I want them to have their wonderful life, something similar to what I've had, even though it will be different. But I'm just amazed, Cindy, at this epiphany that I've most probably had. Hopefully no one else has had it. But at biophysics of the planet, all we're really doing is modifying our behaviour and our social economic structures around the biophysics that really exist, given that we made a lot of mistakes in the past. And it only goes back 100 years. Maybe you could include the Industrial Revolution in terms of emissions, but it's only recently that human beings have made these errors in judgment where they pursued certain opportunities that they didn't understand the risk. And all of a sudden the risk becomes immense, outweighs the opportunity. But that doesn't mean to say inside those risks we're taking, there's not another set of opportunities coming up, socially, economically, that is going to be more viable than saving the planet. That's just an amazing insight for me. Can you talk about your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it is you know, there are huge opportunities coming up. I think it is an incredibly exciting time to be alive. I know that sounds a strange thing to say, particularly now with the advent of COVID-19, but I think there's a long way to go in human discovery and exploration. I think we are an incredible species. We've uncovered so much. And where we stand now is quite different to 100 years ago. We know a lot more. So the closest analogy I can think of is with how you would treat your body. If somebody said, oh, look, you can sell your lungs for a massive profit. Has the guy over there, he wants at least 30, no, he wants 70% of them, but he's going to, you'd just laugh him out of the room, wouldn't you? There's no way you'd cough up your lungs quite literally and hand them over to a salesman. But so as our knowledge of the planet has grown, it's far from complete, and there's a terrible arrogance in human science to think, you've discovered something and that gives you all the answers. It really doesn't. This every day, reveals how little we do know. But we know enough about the biophysics of our planet to know that we have literally been selling our lungs or pulling out our bone marrow and flogging it off, and we've ended up with a very sick system, not so sick that we can't fix it. But it's not that difficult to teach that to children, because it's an instinctive thing. You care for the organism that supports you. In man's arrogance, we've seen the planet as so vast that we can use it, and we've seen ourselves as disconnected from it. But now we're understanding ourselves very much as a part of this living system. So if we don't take care of it in the same way that we would take care of our own biophysics, if you like, then we're going to end up very, very ill. And that's where we stand today. So if you enable that kind of systemic understanding, first of all, which there's so much of science that lets us do now in a very simple way for small children, then you have a mindset that just says, well, that's ridiculous. Why are we doing that then? And especially at this juncture of the world, we have got so many other alternatives. The stuff that's happening in solar cell batteries and solar cell materials is phenomenal. Yeah. And the only reason that it isn't in wider scale production is because of the investment and existing infrastructures. So it's really inspiring to tell them, this is how this works, this is the mistakes we've made, and hey, look, we've got this to fix it. And their kids say, well, why aren't we using that then?
Yeah, and it becomes a paradox, because cognitive dissonance reigns, knowledge, behavior, conflict. And unless you don't have the knowledge, and I suggest a lot of people either don't have it or ignore it, typically, pushing back because they don't want to be informed. And there's a few world leaders like that.
Absolutely, as we can see.
Yeah, as we see today, and there's a whole bunch of followers of the Trump ideal of the future, false prophets about how we fix it. And there's a great book by Rebecca Costa called The Watchman's Rattle, that the basic thesis is that if you get a situation where you have rapid change, as we've been having in the last 30, 40 years, not just COVID, it becomes complex. It doesn't appear simple to them. It becomes more complex, more technology, faster, all sorts of disruptive change is occurring. It becomes difficult. So what happens is that people tune out except for very simple messages like "Make America Great Again."
That's right.
No real policy or strategy or thinking behind it, apart from what someone can drag up from the past that evokes memories and knowledge of the past. So they tend to operate in the past, and you've seen that happen with Brexit. That a whole bunch of people signed up to the Brexit thing. It may turn out differently, but they signed up without really understanding or being whole-sighted around the future. So they'll understand the nationalistic and the, we're all in this, fly the flag, hand over heart, all of that stuff. That'll guide them in their knowledge, and their behaviour will remain the same, but the behaviour is not sustainable in the environment that real. So you get what we call managed adaptive decline, MAD, where people go into an adaptive phase and adapting to the conditions in a very well managed way. So, you'll have that, and that's where the economic model we see kicks in, which is GDP, recessions. It doesn't measure anything valid. It's a measure that you can watch go up and down, but it doesn't measure the validity of a social economic system in real terms. So
absolutely.
We get all this sort of rubbish, and we just call it MAD, M-A-D, madness. But
absolutely.
Coming back and just thinking about this biophysics, it's not even on people's radar, as it's the biophysics of the planet. And how did we leverage that as in the past? So how can we leverage it to meet disruptive change? How do we get biophysics understood in economics? How does it really fit? I just wonder if there's any, I know there's planetary sort of economics, but I don't know if it actually talks to if I see this in schools a lot, it's like you're taught that you've got global warming, like we need to do something about it. Like, what you need to do is grow a tree, or you need to have a local garden, etc. And a lot of those things just don't scale. I've seen so many of those sorts of social economic models that don't scale. Like I saw one in Massachusetts when I was living in America, and it was about build everything out of trees. Everything, grow forest, pine trees, and build everything out of wood. And that just blew my mind. And they were calling this the challenge of the future, and this is what's going to save everything. It sort of, to me, came across as don't drive cars, but, you know, we have to deal with the social side and the economic side as a positive reinforcement, and the education system pushing that, not just the kids and the young people wanting more, but they can get more, such as what you're doing with Planetary. And, you know, learn biophysics for economics, or social economic systems of the future that make money, you know. But you know, understanding that profit is a lag indicator of a lot of other value being driven. You know, when you look at companies say it's profitable, that's the one measure that business uses, and it's like, well, you know, was it really profitable? I mean, we've just lost an airline. Virgin's gone bankrupt, well, into liquidation in Australia. And it's like, what, you know, it's pretty badly run, even in the old system. But, you know, Qantas is having to have maybe having a government bailout, which is taxpayer money. But, you know, it's just amazing that biophysics as part of an social economic system, and if the entrepreneurs were let loose on that, and maybe they have, I just don't know about it, that would create a difference.
Well, I think you've hit on it yourself there, Larry, where you said, well, we have this system called GDP, which, you know, it measures gross domestic output, but it only has one value, only measures it in one domain, the value, economic value. So even if you've made that money making nuclear weapons, or you've made that money, you know, with organised, I was going to say organised crime, which, you know, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's things that
does improve GDP.
It doesn't matter what you've sold to get that, so long as that number's gone up, then that's your measure of value, which is things that obviously that loop around and actually fuel the demise of the system. So I think there are some fantastic people doing work on this. You're probably familiar with Kate Raworth's Donut Economics, but it's trying to look at you know, we need to measure different domains of value. I think you'll be speaking to Christine McDougall, who's the pioneer of syntropic enterprise, and she looks at value in 6 domains. Yes, it is very important, you know, the currency that sustains us, but if you actually look at what, you know, at the balance sheet in a different way, then you're introducing you know, a different understanding of value, and you, instead of just looking at one number, which has got us to where, you know, the oil sector being hugely interesting at the moment, you know, as long as that goes up and up and up and up and up, you're not measuring against all the destruction of the planet that is that it necessitates to get that stuff out of the ground, you know, the raising of the rainforest, the emissions, and so that isn't factored in. But once you start to look at value across different domains, you'd be reading those signs and balancing that in your budget. And as we can see now, there's so many, you know, we've got the sun just pouring this energy down on us. I can't remember how many square kilometers it is of the Saudi Arabian desert. It's not a huge amount. If you put that under solar power, you could power the world. Yeah. And these are the things that I think children are just going to go, duh. Yeah, exactly. You mean you did that when you had that falling out of the sky? And we now have that. Even if, you know, 100 years ago, you might say, oh, well, okay, you did that because we didn't have the mechanism to convert that into energy. But now we do. And so you can see that you can get this fantastic energy that you need to power your economic, your engines of industry, but you can do it in a way that isn't at a negative to the life support systems of the planet. And you're utterly right. The way that economics is taught in school hasn't changed. This is, if you in Kate Raworth's book, you know, she despairs of the economists who developed that system of thinking themselves would be aghast that we haven't evolved that 100 years later, even though everything around us has changed and the way that we need to measure value on our balance sheets has shifted. That what's taught in economics is still these industrial revolution models. Yeah. But that is changing. There are fantastic new economists coming forward and have been for a while, but they're certainly getting much more into the mainstream dialogue. And there are entrepreneurs, and I think you will be speaking with Christine. She's got her the concept of syntropic enterprise, so that the businesses are building themselves in line with Buckminster Fuller being a principle, what delivers overall value to system Earth. Yeah, that's right.
And
I think that's
what we're teaching is being whole-sided, understanding that the world is systemic, and when you have rapidly changing systems through technology, things happen faster in that system, and that is positive and negative feedback loops that are a negative feedback loop has a a positive feedback loop can damage a system. So that if you're getting more of a bad thing, it's positive. If you're taking away from the system, it's negative. So sometimes by stopping something, as we're doing now, it's actually decreasing our problem with the old system. So, what I see is people sort of looking to change basic behaviours of not doing some of the things they were doing before, and working from home, but online education, all of those sort of things. The main issue that we see socially economically is the debt, the immense amount of debt. And that the only way you can produce that amount of debt we had before the COVID-19 is if the system wasn't working. The system hasn't worked. And what you have are two things. You have huge debt from a bad economic system, and that's domestic and sovereign debt. And you are adding to that with COVID-19 that we can't pay back. And most of that debt's held by a very small amount of people that is spread out into the rest of the community by home loans and all those sort of things. So that factored into, hold on, you've been working or doing this, you've just invested, and you've in an economy that's broken, that doesn't work. I think you're going to have to lose a bit of money on that. We look at the great debt reset that has to happen in 2021 as 22. You can't pay back the amount of debt that we had already, and you can't pay back what's been incurred. And in Australia, we'll spend about $1 trillion on, not crashing into the ocean and getting back up, get some height. About $1 trillion in a $3 trillion economy. I don't know where we get that money from.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a great time, and this sort of leads me to that sort of a final sort of set of thoughts from you, which is we're looking at these four horizons. Horizon one, which is the COVID economy or COVID-19 disorientation, health-wise, social and economic. So, bang, this has happened. Though we've dodged a bullet in the past with SARS and MERS and all those sorts of things. Could have seen this one coming, but no one did. So we've got that where there's a disorientation where, the normal sort of Kubler-Ross thing comes in, denial, grief, upset, ignorance, head in the sand, all those sort of behaviours happen, but it's still thrown supply chains, it's thrown all the education, information, communication, production and trading systems out of whack. It's enhanced some, made some better, etc. Then we're moving into what we said, Horizon 2, the COVID-19 economy. That's surviving the lockdown for as long as restrictions are in place. If we don't get those restrictions in place we're not going to have a stabilised COVID-19 economy. We'll flip back into disorientation. The interesting one I'd like you to sort of comment on is Horizon 3, the world post-COVID-19, a move to an old or a new world order. And this is a big question that we have to answer in that Horizon 3. And we've got sort of dates on these, but they're very limiting at the moment, so I won't mention them. But that leads to an Horizon 4, a transformed world. What might that look like? Socially, economically, environmentally. but the Horizon 3, a move to an old or a new world order. Do you think, knowing what you know in your sphere of influence, that there is a real thirst, and I mean thirst, for a shift to a new world order post-COVID, a COVID-19 economy?
Well, I think it's a fantastic opportunity that anybody who's thinking in this way needs to do everything that they can to be part of making happen. I think, you know, we started with the word revealing. You know, it has revealed. It's putting clarity for so many people. You know, we were told that money didn't exist for education, for healthcare. You know, the pillars of society, and now suddenly here's this money, and it's globally. It's Australia, it's the same in the UK. You know, the money's been effectively, as you say, thrown in to shore up a system that's crumbling. You know, can we find the voice? Can we find the leadership to ask for this? To not ask, to turn this, so this money is spent creating a new model. And at the same time, you know, you've got that you can see the reaction of people like Trump, like Bolsonaro, like Orban in Hungary, you know, to Boris Johnson to an extent. They're frozen in the headlights here, but they're just screaming and just doing anything I think there was a tweet from Trump about he's going to do anything he can to shore up the oil industry, because obviously oil went sub-zero, went negative yesterday. So, you know, so it's going to be, you know, it seems actually quite polarized. Have we got the strength of people who want to move forward? Have we got the creativity? Have we got the channels to reach the people who are bewildered by this thing, this terrible thing that has happened to them, and to pull everybody together to peaceably find a new way forward? It's you know, it's not obvious how it's going to happen, but I think that it is a massive opportunity for the people who have been thinking this way for a long time, and to join with the people who have just been knocked out of their sphere of what's normal and what's balanced, what's okay, and to try to pull this forward. The interesting thing is there's lots of requests from companies, from organizations, for how do we do this, what do we make of this opportunity. The question is being asked, I'm sure, to people like you, strategists, futurists. So I just think it's vital that if you feel that you can contribute something now, that you do it. Absolutely.
And I think it's going to be interesting. We're seeing some, if you're going to put it as a narrative coming over, not just who said it, we need to get out of this and back to the past as soon as we can. And that's not just a strategic way of looking at how do you reopen through testing and through limiting and apps. There's an app being put out in Australia to see if you can do tracing, infection tracing, etc. And can we take a bit of the pressure off? We might, still limit. You can't go to pubs and all that sort of stuff. But there's this sort of willingness to let's get out of it as soon as we can, to go back to the past. And I understand that's really important for, say, the hospitality industry, maybe tourism, but I'm not sure that we've actually cracked open sustainable tourism yet.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I worked on it back in the US, and to me it's a false economy. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And unfortunately, the sustainable tourism movement is about making the hotels recycle and all that stuff. Anyway, that's for another subject. That whole sustainable tourism.
I think it does really come. The key thing is value again. I mean, people are so trained to see the only value that counts is this money. Yeah. But look at who are now the key workers: the nurses, the porters, the cleaners, the doctors, the teachers. There's nurses coming off the night shift in the UK who are going to food banks because their work is valued so little that they that they can't actually, in our economic system, they're not paid enough. It's not worth paying them enough so that they can feed themselves. So I think it's a whole an opportunity to really examine, and the people, whether they're thinking like this or whether they're just trying to survive, those are the questions that they're asking. Who has said that these people who are now sustaining, the very people that Boris Johnson wanted to kick out with Brexit, he was cared for in intensive care by a Portuguese nurse and by a New Zealand nurse. The people that he would want to, the Portuguese man will be kicked out because of Brexit. The reason that we've got nurses from New Zealand, thank goodness, coming in is because he cut all the funding for British nurses. So traditionally more of a working class person's profession. If you take away the bursaries to study while you're a student, there was almost 100% decline in uptake of people studying nursing. So that that's why so many of the British medical people come from overseas. So those are the things that we need to reevaluate. The schools, the teachers who are paid a pittance are now holding their key workers, and that we find out that the schools weren't just trying to educate the children on ridiculously low budgets, but they were that was also where children were getting 2 or 3 meals a day, where children were being protected from very difficult backgrounds at home. And yet that money, that job is worth, when you stick the financial value on it, 28 grand a year for a lot of teachers. And yet the people nobody's missed in the life at the moment are the bankers, or who move money around on screens, who make money out of money, which doesn't really have an intrinsic value in terms of what it gives to society. So I think that there's going to be a real reevaluation of value, which is what needs to happen to change this model. It can't just be about making, a system that makes money out of money to make the people who have money more money. And almost human beings are dispendable. They're consumers in you need to overpopulate the planet, because that's what drives that model. But if you reevaluate what value is a human life, what is worth learning, even in school. Really, you're going to be a nurse? How much are you going to get paid for that? Go, if you've got the brains, go off and be get into the system, which you're asked to do the most appalling things,
as you put it.
So it's the senior executives in big companies, or in the banks, or in the finance industry. You turn a blind eye to where that money is actually coming from, that's making all the profits. I mean, I'm sure everybody.
Well, financial services industry, and there's some great references that I could give on this, but the financial services industry has really only been recognised as an industry sector. It was previously distributed around in very low, moderate areas. Like, you still had banks, but they were domestic banks. They weren't merchant bankers. They didn't take risk, and you went in and saved money, and you eventually bought a house and all that stuff. And the commercialisation of financial services is basically something that came out of Wall Street and London. It came out of New York and London. And it was never seen as a productive part of the economy, and it has forced the recognition of itself as a productive sector by its own will, and people making money out of money without actually value adding anything. They put an argument up in the US to say, well, we do add value because we add value to money, making money. But there's no real value necessarily that equates to a reasonable return on an activity. So you get kids doing currency and stockbrokers and all that sort of stuff, earn huge amounts of money for selling stocks and bonds or whatever it may be. And the school teacher gets £28,000, or the nurse gets £28,000. In Australia, it's about the same, about $50,000 that you get, if you're lucky, because a lot of those nurses aren't employed; they're contractors.
That's right. Exactly.
Casualised workforce in schools and universities, casualised workforce in nursing. which has a whole bunch of other issues economically, because you can, in contractor type work, you find it hard to get a loan for a house because you haven't got permanency. Those sorts of things have been wrapped up in this system that doesn't work. And you mentioned peaceable. I just wonder at what point people start to say enough and get really pissed off. You know, that a football player, for God's sake, when I lived in England in the 70s, they were on a wage, basically, and they got looked after. But if you went down the leagues, they had to have a job. And that was the same in Australian football, and tennis only became a professional sport in the 70s. So this is only a rare thing that all of a sudden, you know, a tennis player can earn, you know, $2 million a year, you know, and I'm sure that gets dispersed out because they spend it, and, you know, but, you know, I just don't get, you know, we talk about here about a salary cap, and it used to be a salary cap, not enforced, but that a CEO would only ever be allowed to earn, in most companies, a percentage of what their lowest paid worker was. Yeah. And these aren't socialist views. They sound like it. Here I say socialism to American audience. But you're right, the basics of the economy. You don't get a good economic response if you don't distribute the wealth, so it comes back to the circular flow.
There's no resilience in the system because, you know, the people who are, there's nothing going, the money making money, and it doesn't return anything really to society. No. So this, to the revealing thing again, you know, I think most people in, I think it was 40% of people in America didn't have more than $400 saved for this type of crisis, because of the work that the work that they do is so lowly paid. And also it's often quite meaningless work because you're just supporting company. I mean, they've got we've talked about the key workers, but a lot of people are doing, they're almost treated like drones because, you know, you're working to service this money making. So, you know, what is a human life? Should a human being really be going in and just, you know, almost reduced to a drone type labour that has no meaning apart from that you can pull this. It's almost indentured labour to me. You can pull this tiny bit of money that means that you can, you know, you're kept in bondage to go and get the next bit and the next bit. I mean, some people, hundreds of thousands of people fall through the cracks. I mean, you asked about Cambridge. It's one of the most affluent cities in Britain, but we step over bodies in the doorways now just to get down the street. The homelessness problem has just become so acute because those are people that can't even hang on for that scrap that they're given to, you know, to stay in that 25, 30, 50-year penury to pay off if you get enough to scrape together to pay for your house. And what have you done with your life? But it's so systemic, and, you know, I know we need to draw to a close, but then you've got the whole industry, the entertainment industry, the garbage that they funnel out through that to keep people opiate. You know, it really is the opiate of the people in a huger way than when that was first said. They're doped up on stuff they're exhausted from these meaningless works, then doped up on stuff that means they can't even think beyond that. And you said this simplistic messaging that comes through that system, that you blame the immigrant or you blame the socialist, or you blame somebody. You can't even think anymore through this system, which is all the more the reason that you need to, you know, the first rule of revolution is take over the radio station, you know, get different messages out to children in their 40 years so that they don't fall into this ideology, which was a completely manufactured ideology and has now taken over people's whole concept of how human beings should be living. They can't imagine any other way for us to live here.
Yeah, it's amazing that, you know, there is a whole branch of economics, because what reinforced this financial services was the Chicago School. This idea of the sector and how important it was. It was, you know, most of it came out of the Chicago School, and so that permeated through all the major universities that taught economics. And there's only, and I can't remember the guy's name, but out of I think it's Kansas, University of Kansas or Missouri, I can't remember. He teaches his students different. They find it hard getting jobs. because he teaches them a whole systems economy and how the other economy just doesn't work. You know, these economics that we got to manipulate the biophysics of the planet don't work. Now, for me, make a difference, make a dollar, and don't die doing it. What we're doing is a lot of the work we have, which will be taken away by technology, all the routine stuff. And a colleague of mine, Gerd Leonard, talks in his book called Humanity versus Technology, talks a lot about this, that you have to change the structure of education pretty quickly, formally and informally, to get people able to learn. Otherwise, they're going to be on the amount of money they get paid, how often they get paid it, and the security it offers the household is not good economics. It's just really bad economics, and it's not sustainable. I'm a social democrat. I'm a capitalist. I like the idea of making money. What's the point of having $1 billion? I didn't know what to do with, $1 million, let alone $1 billion. But so just to wrap up this Horizon 3, there's a lot of issues that we've talked about in that, and we could go on for a long time. And I think it's sort of like when you see the race, the horses when they're doing the jumps, is that we've got the first jump is a relatively small one. Terrible to say, because it's the disorientation, COVID-19. And it's terrible because it's a major health thing. It's very, very sad. It's killing people. But it's a small hurdle compared to organising the COVID-19 economy and getting that to work in some way. Then the third hurdle is, in that Horizon 3, is the world post-COVID-19, a move to an old or new world order. We've got to make those decisions. And what we do in that Horizon 3 will be indicative of what Horizon 4 is. A transformed world. Now, that does require, we have a process here called involve, sell, tell. And you talked about peaceable. And I just wonder how long that people are going to put up with the current system we've got when they move into Horizon 3 and hopefully into Horizon 4. What are they going to do? Are they, as government's going to say, well, let's get involved with the people around the decisions we're going to make. And I'm hoping that is the case. So let's understand there's a new narrative required. There's a new social economic order required that deals with the environmental issues that are coming at us fast. Is there or do we have to sell them on it through elections and then put pressure on from the people telling the politicians? Because I don't get that there's an appetite for this type of thinking. It's starting to emerge, but in the narrative that I see in what's going to happen after the pandemic, it's basically the same stuff, different context, but nothing really changes. But the next one, which is tell, I can see particularly around the debt, when the sovereign debt and the domestic debt, which are two of the same things, they're all paid owned by citizens, consumers, etc. Sovereign and domestic debt, when that gets to absolute breaking point, people can't pay their mortgages. What do you do? In days gone by, and this was part of Obama's plan post GFC, global financial crisis, was to have a debt reset. Where the people were allowed to forgive. They gave a whole bunch of debt to get the system going. That was stopped by Congress and obviously Wall Street. But you go back through history and there's been many times when there had to be a debt reset because the system had built up so much debt that people couldn't operate. So, what is a person who can't pay their mortgage going to do? I think they'll be doing less consuming, which is a good thing. But they'll also be slowing down the machine that the stimulus is going to be meant to fast forward. When we've put some money into, instead of going like that, the economy's going like that and bottoming out just to save the social side. If it had gone like this, we would have been all, even at GFC level. But you've got to then stimulate this coming out here. What's it going to stimulate it to? What's it going to be? Are we going to just get $10,000 each to go and buy another television or something like that?
Yeah, I know.
Or are we going to get some real strategy around what we do around that?
it's really tricky, Larry. I don't have the answers at all for that. I think that my hope is that we were so unprepared for even though, I'm sure everybody's familiar now with the heads up that were given around the global pandemic. Even Bill Gates' work, I think that was 2016. He said that's one of the things that the risks we most have to be prepared for. There was tremendous arrogance in both Britain and America. I think Australia and New Zealand, is exemplar, but it was almost just an arrogance of privilege and entitlement. We don't get hit by these funny little Asian diseases. No. To be honest, that was a huge message in here. But now we've been totally whacked by it. Yeah. And I think hopefully that will make people, I hate to say it because I'm so sorry for the suffering and the loss of life, but now we have been so warned about these other systemic things that are actually happening, climate change and all the fallout of climate change, the displacement of people, the failure of the harvest, these are massive things that you have been given, that have been mapped out very clearly by scientists, to the extent that we've now formulated the UN SDGs to deal with it. 5 years in from that, we've done very, very little since, they were announced in 2015. So it's really is time for government, for leaders, for people to put in the planning to be prepared for when these things come. And hopefully there's enough strong leadership. They're not the people who are in government at the moment, but in other parties, who will find the narrative to communicate to the people that unless we now plan and prepare for these things, which does require a different value system, then there's no resilience in our system. We've seen a 3-week lockdown has brought the system to its knees. So what happens when these bigger things, which are coming, hit us? We now need leaders who can prepare and plan for what we know is coming, mitigate those things and shift the value system. So hopefully it can happen through the countries that have democracies, and it can be peaceable, but it's very hard to say that, because the levels of displacement and the levels of even famine that are coming from the fallout of COVID-19 are horrific. Yes. So whether you can maintain peace in that environment, I don't know.
Yes, the takeaways I'm getting, and please, I'll just name a few and then ask you, is values. Is what are your values, and we write about this in our book, but do the values that you have personally align to the values that your organisation offers to the world? Do your values make sense in your life? Do you understand enough about the world to understand what you have to value at this point in time? That was different 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. What you have to value now is really important, what you're saying. So some other takeaways that, from an audience perspective, that you would like to highlight, Cindy?
Well, it's very hard, because I'm sure your audience is a hugely aware, well-informed and intelligent audience. I think it is about, really being conscious and open to this as a huge opportunity for transformation. It's out of the tragedy can come opportunity, and we're so close to the wire. 8 years to keep climate change below 1.5 degree warming, that if we don't take opportunities like this, there's not that many more coming. So to really to see that opportunity to reevaluate because I think change does come from the personal, as you said, are your own values aligned with the world that, how you live in yourself and how you've created your businesses? Are they aligned to the future, for the world that you want to see, so that you're ready to take this opportunity? I think that is the you know, to learn out of this that we are really globally interconnected. Somebody sneezed in or coughed in Wuhan, and it's gone right around the world. So that to really to look and to think systemically, and to think how, you know, what you're planning for your future self, your future businesses, can really encompass Earth as an interconnected system, and can add value in all the domains that we need, not just money, to live successfully here.
Wow. I'm so glad that you're on in this interview, Cindy, and on the team as such, because we're absolutely aligned to what you're saying. The one takeaway that I would...
It's 5 o'clock.
Well, there you go. It's just telling me the time. One takeaway I would really ask everyone to consider, if not do, and let me just get it up here. One that you haven't spoken about. We've spoken about it. There we go. So this is now what we're looking at over the computer. And this is my big takeaway for my kids and my grandkids. And when we get the chance, it doesn't happen often normal times, of 23 people getting together. It's a challenge, but I'm just thinking when 10 years from now, and they're bringing girlfriends and boyfriends and all that sort of stuff, wow, it's going to be over 30 people all being together. But that's, for me, that's the future. And I think what we're seeing here is just such a great example of what a person can do. And obviously, you know, Cindy's got a lot of support behind her in doing this, but founding this as a way of educating in their way our kids to really appreciate and understand the interconnectivity they have with their world. And I think that's one of the key points. It ain't my world. I'm 69 going on 70. If I get another 10, 15, even 20 years, woohoo, wouldn't I love that? And that's to see my grandkids grow up and be a great granddad. But this is just fantastic, Cindy, and I just thank you so much for doing this. And anything we can do to help. And if anyone's got any questions, if you go to Planetary and it's up there, .world, which I think is wonderful, then by all means do. And if you need to get any other information, then by all means get in touch with me. So, Cindy, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Larry. And I think you did one mistake in the interview here. It's still your world, Larry, and you're a really important part of shaping and changing what happens next. So please don't abandon us too early.
Oh, well, that's what we've got in our statement. It's make a difference, make a dollar. And that was always my sort of thing. I make a difference, make a dollar.
Absolutely.
Make a dollar. And then I got leukemia. And then all the other stuff that goes with that. And I've added, don't die doing it, because my wife, beautiful wife, Helen, will say, you're not going to America. And I go, okay, I'm not going. And then gradually she goes, what's this here? You're going to America. And I go, well, it's only for 3 weeks. And she goes, you're not. And I said, I won't die doing what I'm doing. So that became make a difference, make a dollar, and don't die doing it. And that's what I want for my kids too. So, but thank you, Cindy. Thank you for that, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Larry. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I really appreciate everybody out there who's listening. I'm sure you're doing amazing things, so please keep on doing it, because I think we can all help be part of making the world that we want.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cindy.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this Straight Talking the COVID Economy podcast. Thank you for listening. And please subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. For more information about Resilient Futures, please visit www.resilientfutures.com, and please support our partner, Impact Africa Network, at www.impactafrica.network. We need all the support we can to help them build their own incubator. We know that there are many other great podcasts out there, and your time is precious, and you chose to listen to Straight Talk on the COVID Economy. And we appreciate that. Thank you.